Before you start writing, make sure you understand the story well, look up unknown words, and highlight sentences that are important. Also think about whether the story contains some symbols that are essential for your analysis. The easiest part of the analysis is usually the setting. The authors like to describe it directly or not mention it at all. However, your job is to note where and when the story takes place. Sometimes, for example, the social environment is relevant too. The plot is like the structure of the story. Exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and the resolution are the pillars on which the story is built. Usually, in a short story, you will find only one scene or an event which impacts the protagonist in some way. Is the plot linear, chronological, or does it change? These questions should help you with understanding the story. Let's take, for example, Cinderella. You know her. The exposition is where we discover the everyday life of her. The action rises when Cinderella gets invited to the ball but is not allowed to attend it. However, she rebels against her stepmother and meets the prince anyway. The climax is when she leaves at midnight, losing a glass slipper in the process. The consequence of this event is that the prince says that he will marry the woman whose foot fits in the slipper. The slipper fits only Cinderella's foot. The resolution is Cinderella and the prince get married. End of the story. Now that you are familiar with the plot, you are also familiar with the characters. There are two types of them. Flat characters, for example, Cinderella's stepmother doesn't change throughout the story at all. On the other hand, Cinderella, who starts as a poor servant but ends up as a maybe rich princess. These changes can be external or internal, where the character's mind changes. Sometimes there's an antagonist. It's typical for them that their personality is the opposite of the protagonist's. Nick Adams, for example, is the famous protagonist from Hemingway's short stories. Now, how writers reveal their characters. Their personality traits can be expressed directly or indirectly. When there's a sentence like, "He was a great liar," then it's a direct commentary from the author about the character. But you can get to know the character far better from the indirect characteristics. How the character speaks, argues, and thinks. What is the character afraid of? How does the character show emotions? What does the character think about themselves? What are their quirks and perks? Unfortunately, not all questions can be answered about every character. In the most short stories, the reaction to one single event is all the information you get. It's important to recognize what this event is and how does the character behave in that situation. Always remember, only what can be proved with lines can be interpreted. In the novel The Road, the main character battles mostly with an external conflict. The same external conflict that can be in a novel can also appear in a short story. Basically, it's a conflict with an outside force. The internal conflict happens in the character's mind. It's usually a difficult decision, denial, or for example dealing with a trauma. It studies the human psychology. In another famous novel, Lolita, the protagonist fights his own desires, which means it is an internal conflict. There are generally four types of point of view and narrators. The most commonly used is the third person limited and the first person. The other two are a rarity in literature. Themes are like the general ideas that make up the story. There are really many of them. For example, in Romanticism, nature was a popular theme. Every writer has a unique style, with the help of which they create the atmosphere in their stories. Tone in which they write sets the mood. You can ask yourself whether the story is easily readable to you. If so, the author uses probably a common language, short sentences, or a vocab that is modern. Don't forget to identify literature devices and explain their meaning. All in all, your analysis should be divided into three parts. The introduction, with a topic sentence where you write the name of the author, title, text type, genre, year of publication, and shortly what the story is about. In the second part belong a short summary where you answer the W questions. Also, you have to analyze the story with the help of the mentioned aspects. Try to connect your findings. And at the end, in the conclusion, you can give your own opinion to the story. Don't forget to use always the present tense.